being here at this session, the official side event on staying on course for 1.5, and we're looking today at Africa's role in accelerating shipping's green transition. Now, already the first part of that title feels hugely optimistic, and I think a lot of the work and the discussion today will feature on adaptation, but also the opportunity that can be for Africa in the transition going forward. So if we think about Africa and look at the population and the opportunity, Africa will soon have the largest population on the planet. It's the largest growth, and the goods and services that Africa will need, many will be bought by shipping, and the exports that Africa will make will be taken by shipping. There are huge opportunities, and those opportunities need to be supported by the global community. Now is the time for us to come together and work even closer and harder to ensure a more focused transition and to make sure we don't slip even further behind. Africa has an abundance of solar, wind and hydro resources that can power production of zero-emission green hydrogen and ammonia to fuel shipping's clean energy transition. And the energy transition presents Africa with a tremendous opportunity to develop skilled workforces, to build, operate and maintain fleets running on innovative technologies. Africa's youth represents the greatest hope for creating sustainable, climate-aligned shipping pathways that stimulate just and blue economies. That is why, as Chief Executive of Lloyd's Register Foundation and co-hosting alongside colleagues from the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, we're glad to be able to bring together some of the most promising and powerful voices from the continent to be able to fulfill our goals and convene international partners to tackle the ocean's greatest safety challenges. On behalf of our partner, the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, I'd also like to indicate to you there's a new report that has come out recently called Tides of Change. That report gives a framework for developing just and inclusive shipping corridors. It puts the conditions of what companies and governments need to do to establish new green corridors which create sustainable jobs and skills and puts people in the heart of that transition, and especially the opportunity for Africa in that transition. I want to present to you, and it'll be by video, by recording, some remarks from Lydia Ngugi, who is the president of the Maritime Technology Cooperation Centre in Africa, who could not be here today, but wanted to share her insights and the work of the MTC Centre in Africa.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Receive greetings from MTCC Africa, that is the Maritime Technology Cooperation Center for Africa. My name is Lydia Ngugi. I am the head of MTCC Africa. By way of formal introduction, MTCC Africa looks into aspects of capacity building for climate change mitigation in the shipping and maritime industry. We are one of 5 centers that have been established by the International Maritime Organization, key to support aspects of decarbonization, as well as the implementation of the initial IMO GHG strategy. I am honored to be giving this address at this well-esteemed forum that is titled Staying on Course for 1.5, Africa's Role in Accelerating Green Shipping Transition. I further take note of the great work that has been carried out by the Lloyd's Register Foundation under the leadership of Madam Ruth. I take further note and appreciate the presence of Madam Magda, who is DG Move, Director General at the European Commission. This is very great examples and insights as to how the North-South cooperation can be and is being implemented to build capacity for climate change mitigation in the shipping and maritime industry, and most importantly, bringing on board the technical and policy aspects that have been underpinned under the initial IMO GHG strategy. All this aligns to a just and equitable transition that will support the domestic vessels in respective developing countries, as well as supporting the green transition within the port infrastructure. It is important to note that the small island developing states and the least developed countries must not be left behind in this call towards capacity building, supporting decarbonization in the maritime and shipping industry. MTCC Africa supports the implementation of pilot projects being in the center of the Africa map. We do this by working very closely with the state departments within various governments, as well as maritime industries, to support initiatives that will give practical examples, practical ideas on how to move further ahead together. I must again emphasize on the need for the North-South cooperation, because moving further ahead together, we must work with development partners. In working with the development partners, it also brings into perspective the implementation and as well the consideration of the United Nations Development Goals. For example, goal number 14, which anchors on the life under the sea. Goal number 17, that anchors on aspects of partnerships, evident in the partnerships that are currently going on, and goal number 13, that anchors on aspects of climate change mitigation. Among the goals, I also note that all goals under the SDGs are important. I would also look at the emphasis of the UN SDG goal number 5, which brings on board the support of women in all sectors. All the above aspects under the United Nations Development Goals are key, and when read together with the mandate of the initial IMO GHG strategy, as well and as well as ideas on Africa's role in accelerating shipping's green transition. As I thank you all, I wish you wonderful discussions and fruitful insights. Thank you very much. And once again, receive greetings from MTCC Africa. Thank you.
So thank you so much. And for those of us who know Lydia, we know what a transformative difference it can be when even one person decides to make a change. And Lydia, in leading the initiative in Africa, is really showing us all how that cooperation can work and how it can mobilize many people and many organisations behind the cause. I also note Lydia's call for North-South cooperation, and it seems like a good time to talk about some of the work that we're doing to establish ocean stewardship centres, where we, in partnership with the United Nations Global Compact, which is the private sector arm of the United Nations who are committed, the private sector partners who are committed to the Sustainable Development Goals. In partnership, we're establishing 2 centres in Africa, one in Kenya and one in Ghana, to mobilise the private sector towards the goals of the maritime economy. They will also be connected across the Global South to share good practice, but connected into a wider network of maritime ocean stewardship centres and the Ocean Stewardship Coalition, which is a North-South coalition. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to highlight that here. But without further ado, what I want to do now is to introduce our keynote speaker. We're very grateful that the Director General of DG Mobility and Transport, Magda Kopczynska, is here with us today to give us the welcoming, to give us our opening address. Thank you, Magda.
Thank you for having me here. It's always fun to come back to talking about shipping. For some of you who will know me, I had spent quite considerable time working on European Union shipping policies before I started now working on European Union transport policies. It doesn't mean shipping is not part of transport, but just, some people will say it's not, but okay, that's a side comment. It's actually very nice to, I can come back to that later. It's very nice to talk after Lydia, not only because she kindly introduced me here, but also because she does speak for MTCC, Maritime Technology Cooperation Centre, which is a project funded by the European Union already for, I think, somewhere around 8 years. Second round of that project just started. And the exact reason for that project was to make sure that we have those MTCCs in key parts of the world. And we thing is we help to bring parts of those regions together working on decarbonization. It's actually not in my speech, but I will start with that. Because listening to Lydia, I was just thinking that when we put the first round of MTCC on the table, which was somewhere around 2014 or 2015, let's be honest between ourselves, the notion of global shipping going ahead with decarbonization sounded far-fetched, is I think the phrase. We are talking 2015. 3 years later, first initial strategy of the IMO agreed. Last July, not only update of that strategy agreed with a much more ambitious target, but also commitment. I take it as a serious commitment to come up at the international level, at the level of International Maritime Organization, with specific measures that will make that zero emission mid or around mid-century, whatever is the final wording, a reality. And I think we should really not underestimate the importance of the July decision taken by the Marine Environment Protection Committee of the IMO. I take it as a very strong policy commitment, political commitment of all the countries, but also understanding on the part of the industry that supported that commitment. But where does it bring us when it comes to discussion focusing on Africa? I think everybody agrees that the decarbonization effort that lies ahead of shipping is not just tweaking a little bit here and there, but it's a serious paradigm change when it comes to the type of fuels that shipping will have to use. We are not there yet. I think we know what those fuels can be, but we are not there yet 100% in terms of full knowledge, full technology.
Camille Bourgeon from the Secretariat of the International Maritime Organization in London. I've been working with the IMO since 2017 on mostly on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from ships. And it's been, as Magda said before, a long journey, and indeed already with the adoption of the initial strategy in 2018, it was a big step forward, and we had a very important event that happened in July with the adoption of the 2023 IMO greenhouse gas strategy.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Omar Ofodile. I'm a Deputy Director in the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency. I'm also the MTCC focal point for West African region. I work with the administration. We are the regulators of shipping and maritime activities in Nigeria. We deal and interface a lot with all other African countries and shipping organizations on issues of decarbonization. And I'm glad to be here to share my views on the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So just briefly, just to set the context again, what we will be doing during the course of this session is to explore different areas such as the African seafarers, capacity building in the continent, technology development, and of course transfer, and issues around policy development and implementation, and anything else that perhaps anybody may consider relevant. So let's dive into it then. I will start off with an individual question. I'll tell you what, Camille, I'll go with you first, if that's okay. Yeah, so what mechanisms, Camille, do you think can better enable collaboration across countries and the supply chain to ensure equitable access to zero carbon technologies and fuels across the global fleet? So what sort of mechanisms do you think could enhance collaboration across nations in that regard?
Thank you, Sam. So it's indeed, I think, the key question that we'll be discussing today, that shipping is essential to the economic development in Africa and everywhere in the world. And is also bringing, and this transition, which will bring additional costs to shipping, has to be made in a planned manner, and may also bring, and will also bring opportunities, development opportunities for countries. When it comes to IMO's initiatives to support, it's I think the first aspect is in a way the kind of traditional technical cooperation, capacity building activities, supporting the implementation of IMO's regulations throughout the world. There are a number of ongoing projects, in particular in Africa, and we've had the introductory remarks from Lydia. Indeed, the MTCC Africa has been doing a lot of amazing job in Africa for the past few years. We very glad that the European Commission has confirmed its financial support for the phase 2 of the project, and we're grateful for that. And in addition to that, I'm happy to note that the government of Denmark just announced earlier last week a pledge of almost $3 million US for IMO funds, in particular targeting activity in Africa. And I think it's important to recognize the efforts that are made by a number of countries to include the inclusiveness, to increase the inclusiveness of IMO's work. Now, we've heard about fuels and technologies, and indeed, I think all the projections that we have that are aligned with IMO's targets show that the majority of the greenhouse gas reduction effort will come from a systemic change in the fuels that are used in shipping. And in order to ensure an equitable access, we first need to have an access to the fuels. So we need to scale up the production of these fuels. This will require attracting vast amounts of public and private investments in the in the renewable energy producers. And the first thing we need for that is a business case, is creating conditions that will make it viable, commercially viable, for producers to sell these fuels to the shipping sector. And the shipping sector is a huge market. It is today consuming around 300 million tons of fuel a year. And there are various ways to reduce the cost gap, but I think this is really embedded in the strategy, not only higher ambitions for 2050 with intermediary checkpoints 2030, 2040, but also IMO member states defined a clear roadmap and a timeline for the development of the measures that will actually enable to achieve these ambitions. There are a number of proposals at the IMO that are currently being discussed on actually how to reduce this cost gap. And many of these proposals have a particular emphasis on one dimension of the IMO strategy, which is to pay particular attention to the needs of developing countries, in particular seeds and LDCs. So that's the aspect of exploring the opportunities of
floor channel. This is the floor channel.
with UNCTAD and IRENA, specifically highlighting the opportunities in Namibia for becoming a producer of green hydrogen, in particular for shipping. And I would have been very happy to hear updates from his side. But from the IMO, we have a project called the Green Voyage 2050 that has been working in Africa on some specific fuel, actually it's third generation biofuels types. And when we organized conferences earlier this year in Ghana and in Kenya, some of you may have been there, one of the key takeaways was really the need to further accelerate the exploration, the very concrete exploration of the opportunities in the countries. And I'm sure that this will be even more important in the years to come within IMO's work to actually help countries in developing feasibility studies with companies, etc. Yeah, I'll stop here for now. I've been quite long, but if I may just
yes, please feel free.
Stress one last point, which to me is important, is cooperation among member states in the shipping sector firstly takes place at the IMO. IMO is the global forum for member states to come together, share their views, where they're coming from, and develop the policies that apply to shipping globally. So I think we need more participation from African countries in the IMO. And I think this has been repeatedly stated, including by the chair of the Marine Environment Protection Committee, Harry Conway from Liberia. We've set up in 2022 a trust fund to support the participation of delegates from small island developing states and least developed countries. And for the first time,
This is the floor channel. This is the floor channel. This is the floor channel. This is the floor channel.
talking about opportunities within Africa, I see it sort of, we had a great intro from therefore there needs to be more refueling options. Could African ports be one of those potential locations? For me, there's wider opportunities outside of just being a renewable producer. The green jobs surrounding the renewable energy infrastructure, even the seafaring community. Africa boasts a very large young workforce. I think 80 or 70% of the sub-Saharan Africa is less than 30 years old, and that's a large working age population and real jobs potential within the continent. And, also, so when we talk about the kind of supply and demand at a global level around future fuels and first mover initiatives, a lot of the issue is around the kind of imbalance, the lack of supply infrastructure. And that's really what the African proposition offers. There's a huge hydrogen producing potential. How can they actually help unlock some of the first movers that are grappling with this very problem? We're seeing lots of first mover initiatives. I'm part of one. All the decarbonisation centres are out there, all have their own initiatives, but we're still grappling with how can we create these bankable projects? How can we bridge the cost gap? And really, we're at this, a lot of these green corridors, particularly the ones that have been going for a couple of years, they're trying to answer the question of how do we acquire these fuels? And I reiterate Camille's point. It'd be great if Namibia was here because they could talk about the projects underway, but how do we bring all of that together? How do we integrate these kind of first mover projects with potential across the region? Yeah, and then also in terms of I just want to talk more widely about sort of various, because I've obviously introduced myself as looking at uptake of alternative fuels, but there are other things in which we could look at around efficiencies that we could create. Africa also has, its navigable inland waterways as well. How can we actually harness some of the more efficient sea transportation over road and rail, improving air quality in various areas around these waterways as well? So there are other ways of looking at opportunities. And recently, when we were talking about this ports example, I said, we could find, previously I was saying, we could look at potential port locations that offer alternative bunkering locations. Instead of looking at this as a investment in capital for bunkering infrastructure, what are the wider benefits? And my colleagues actually put together a kind of process of evaluating what could be sustainable first mover initiatives. They don't necessarily have to be ports that have loads of vessel traffic or lots of renewable energy producing potential. Let's find opportunities where there's opportunities to deliver socio-economic benefits and create a local economy. So I'm positive, and I see lots of opportunities within Africa that perhaps that need to be discussed more, and more platforms like this. It would be great if the IMO uses its convening power. I was recently part of an IMO initiative, and they did manage to get lots of different flag states and government ministries together. So I don't see why it can't be replicated in the Africa context as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. I mean, as you say, there's a lot of potentials that just need to be harnessed. And I think that there are a lot of initiatives going on at the moment, albeit in pockets, to try and facilitate that collaboration that is needed in order to harness it. In fact, one of the things we are going to be doing, there's another event on the 8th of December, where we will be looking to discuss how to better enhance collaboration within the continent itself. A collaboration not just between countries, but also amongst shipping companies themselves in Africa. So very important in order to be able to, as you say, undertake those sort of projects that you're talking about. So, so thank you for that.
Just on top of that as well, because a lot of the green corridors are trying to create a massive demand signal, saying, you know, there's this stable, strong demand signal here in this part of the world, and give confidence to the fuel supply and the infrastructure side to invest in that. You can replicate that in the case of Africa. There's a lot of West African coastal shipping that happens that stays region bound. How can you harness that and create that demand signal and create a market or an ecosystem that could create a similar thing? You know, there's so much potential. I mean, we see so much long haul transportation going around the Cape of Good Hope through the Suez Canal. You know, that there are opportunities there that need to be explored.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Hila. So we'll move on to Omar now. We'll talk, I think we've discussed a little bit about policy. We've also talked about technology and projects. I think it's time to talk about seafarers, the African seafarers themselves, and to some extent, the African fleet. So Omar, in your view, what are the mechanisms or initiatives that you think can enable equitable transition for African shipping companies as well as the seafarers to net zero emissions future? As we know, in fact, it's been said various quarters all over the world that Africa could become one of the largest supplier of seafarers in the future, as you alluded to, Ahila. So how do you think, what do you think needs to be done to ensure they are not left behind, to ensure that potential is fully realized?
Yeah, like the other speakers had said, there are a lot of initiatives going all around the continent on different issues as regards decarbonization and also transition to the new era of biofuel. And Africa is no different from that. The most important thing here is it's been stated that we have enormous human resources. And Africa can compete favorably with the entire globe if given the right opportunity, if it follows through the right steps. There is need for absolute coordination, regional coordination of activities, especially in getting additional training for seafarers. Seafarer is no longer in the era of training qualified seafarers. That is not what we're talking about here now. What we're talking is training seafarers that will be able to handle the new upcoming technologies, especially as regards using hydrogen as a major source of fuel for vessels and ammonia and all. In South Africa, I think they have a lot of trainings and new outfits coming up that may, give seafarers adequate training in this regard. And also in Ghana, in Kenya, and of course in Nigeria, we are training seafarers in Nimasa quite a lot. But there's something lacking. We need the technology. We need the finance. We need to develop the standards so that the seafarers being churned out now by Africa will compete favorably in the global markets. So it's not for Africa anymore a question of do we have the human capacity, we have it, but do we have qualified capacity to put Africa on that page with every other person? So there is urgent need for absolute regional collaboration. There is need to also collaborate with other countries that already have the existing technology to assist us in achieving this. Because it's only when we achieve this that we can be on that high-level supply chain and no longer the low-level supply chain. So Africa, for me, and for all the activities going on, will strive to not to be left behind. That's the language, by embracing all the opportunities around to achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very clear. So what you're saying is Africa is ready, it's got the people, it's got the desire, it's got the willingness, but you need access to finance, access to technology, it needs collaboration, not just amongst itself, countries within Africa, but also with the international partners who are willing to support that transition. Thank you very much indeed. So, yeah, we still have time for one or two more questions before we open up to the audience for some insightful questions, I'm sure. So, Camille, I'm going to come back to you, if that's okay. And the question will be more around the IMO 2020 Global Sulfur Regulation, which personally I had a very close involvement in doing some work with you and others at the IMO at the time of the implementation of the regulation. So in your view, Camille, what lessons do you think the IMO learned from the past shipping transitions, like the IMO 2020? You know, in what way do you think Africa can contribute to preventing whatever challenges or issues that were faced at the time? And therefore, how can that past experience guide not just Africa, but the rest of the world in this transition?
Thanks, Sam. I think there's really two different aspects in your question. For those who don't know, the IMO 2020 is a different set of regulations in IMO that doesn't look into the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, but that looks into reducing the emission of sulfur oxides by ships. And indeed, through the IMO, member states adopted amendments to the MARPOL Convention. You know, and following the adoption of these amendments in 2020, on the 1st of January, the sulfur content in fuels was reduced for all ships trading internationally from 3.5 to 0.5%. So it's almost an 80% reduction from one day to another. It's a very significant piece of legislation that was effective in reducing the amount of sulfur oxides. It's really bringing significant benefits for human health and the environment, in particular in coastal regions. It also is good to highlight this, because IMO does not only deal with emissions of greenhouse gas from ships, but also other environmental impacts, and more even importantly is the safety regulations that are being developed to make sure that ships that sail around the world are safe. And this also is an important implication for the decarbonization journey. No, the IMO 2020 is an interesting case study in a way. I mean, I don't think we can replicate it, but there has some interesting lessons to be learned from what happened in the IMO. It showed that global rules have an impact on the global sector, because these provisions apply to all ships without differentiating on the basis of the flag, making it actually possible to enforce the provisions. And in developing global rules, you actually have positive global impacts everywhere, including in Africa, everywhere. And I think one of the reasons for the success of the IMO 2020 regulations is the intense cooperation that took place between member states in the years before entry into effect of this legislation. Also the cooperation with the industry at its wider definition, the shipping industry, but also fuel oil suppliers, port state, flag states. Everyone was really on board to make this transition possible. I think having anticipated on the effective entry into effect date of this instrument was key also to the success, meaning that the industry knew in advance where they would have to go. Guidelines were developed, best practices were shared, etc. And again, this also showed the relevance of the IMO as the main global forum for member states, for states to develop regulations for the global shipping sector. Now, your question was also about how African countries can have a role. I'm really not here to say what African countries can do or should do. I think it's really for every member state, every country to decide how they can or they want to contribute to we're talking here about decarbonization, so about how to contribute to the shipping decarbonization, each with its own capacities and priorities and time frame, but IMO is ready to support the member states in developing. I mean, we have an instrument that's called national action plans I'm not sure this has been this really has been harnessed as its full potential, because these national action plans can really support achieving the global goals, taking as a starting point where the countries are, and countries are all in very different situations. So these national action plans can be used to also help identifying the barriers and the opportunities in the country. We talked about seafarers. Some countries may prioritize as a strategic vision the development of the workforce. Others will focus more on the production of renewable energy. But I really think that the national action plans can be used as a powerful tool. They are referred to in the IMO strategy, and there are some already examples of effective national action plans. So we, as IMO Secretariat, we stand ready to help individual member states in these efforts.
Thank you very much, Camille. IMO stands ready to help in developing and implementing plans and strategies. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So let's take a pause from asking you questions and from me asking you questions, and let's see what the audience have got to say. Anybody has any question you want to put to the panelists? Ruth, microphone for Ruth, please. Are we good? And then you said, okay, Adam, thank you. And then one there and one here. Excellent. The hands are going up now. Okay, that's right, good. Good. Very good.
Well, Sam, I'm just going to take the opportunity to ask you something as well. Because,
yes, please.
Because you're moderating, and yet you've got this amazing new role as the Africa High-Level Climate Champion Lead in Maritime. And that provides you with an opportunity which is complementary to the IMO system for non-state actors, and I just wonder if you could comment about how you're going to approach that role. What do you see as the big challenges and targets that you're going to try and hit as you take that role on? And we wish you well in that role, by the way.
Right. You want to get me talking, Ruth? Thank you very much for that. No, great question. Yes, like has been said, the opportunities are huge for this continent. I decided to take on that role because I felt, on a personal level, I felt the region is stronger together than operating on its own or in fragmentation, which happens quite a lot. And I also know from my own contacts within the region, within the continent, that they also want to collaborate with each other. So it was a case of giving them the platform to engage and to work as a unit. And as you said, Ruth, it is not, whenever we talk collaboration, people generally, especially in the context of Africa, people only think about the countries. There are non-state actors as well who are key They are key players to the energy transition in this continent. In fact, one of the opportunities that I foresee as a professional myself is the opportunity for indigenous shipping to grow and develop and be part of that transition. And there's a very important need for them not to be left behind. Because today they operate ships, they create jobs in the region, they contribute to the growth of the economy. If you transition without them, what happens to those jobs? What happens to those livelihoods that they support? And of course, what happens to the contribution they make to the economy? So the case is compelling to work together between state actors and non-state actors. The challenges that I foresee personally is whilst there's the interest, there is that fear of the unknown. We're going into this journey. What does it entail? Am I going to be out of business? Can I deal with it? Where's the money going to come from? Who's going to pay for it? I haven't got the expertise. I haven't got the technology. Who is going to help me? So there is something there about helping them see the opportunities that lie ahead, helping them know that they are not alone, that there are a lot of international collaborators out there, whether it's the global north or global south, that are willing to work with them. I think one thing I have to say, I haven't attended COP now, and I also attended the Africa Climate Week. There is real appetite and desire to support and help each other through this energy transition. There definitely is. And what my role is to help facilitate that engagement and collaboration. And what we're going to be doing, hopefully on the 8th of December, we're going to be announcing the launch of a global maritime Africa coalition, which will be an all-inclusive coalition within the continent and also engaging with international collaborators. It's a privilege to be involved in any way in doing something like that. And of course, you'll be hearing more from me about the things we're going to be doing with that coalition. So thank you very much, Ruth, for that question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
My name is Captain Bahal. I'm a master mariner. I work for Indian Climate Change and Societal Impact Research. It's a general question to any panelist. I recently heard news report stating that EU is taking the unilateral decision to discontinue single-use main engines on ships. We recognize that ships are a big polluter. We recognize the harmful effects of greenhouse gases and sulfur. But do you feel that Asia and Africa are ready with alternative fuels in terms of, let's say, methanol, green methanol, or LNG, or hydrogen? Or is it a premature decision?
Okay. Who is best placed to answer that? I know it's a question that is particularly focused on EU regulation. Is that?
It's a decision of the EU last week, and it was a unilateral decision to discontinue the construction of single fuel engine.
Okay. So you're asking the panel to comment on the implications of that?
The implications to Asia and Africa, because these countries, these continents are not ready with alternative fuels as yet in terms of bunkering facilities.
Okay, so I think that question basically implies that there's a dual fuel element that's required in the engines going forward. That being said, we've seen an order book of dual fuel vessels being ordered, but there's no methanol being burned on those dual fuel vessels, right? So there's still that optionality there. It's not like we've cornered these continents into running off alternative fuels before they're ready. Yes, there's going to be a need for training and preparation and investment and the infrastructure to support that shift. I'm not on top of the regulation, by the way, so I'm just commenting on what I've just heard as a reaction. But for me, it's not a regulation that's necessarily cornering Africa to make any decision about the fuel mix or jump the gun in terms of its it being prepared. Yeah, that's kind of my point to that.
Thank you very much, Ahila. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a fantastic panel. My name is Eric. I'm heading the ocean work at the UN Global Compact. And we had to have people together with you both in Ghana and Kenya for the maritime just transition work there. We work with the Lloyd's Register Foundation establishing these centers. And I think it really echoes what was said earlier by you, Sam, that we need more governments to go to the IMO from Africa. Extremely important. They have to be there face to face to discuss these issues, but we also need more African companies around the table. I mean, the whole GHG strategy was a result of the private sector last 6 years really working hard through the ICS and other bodies really pushing this forward. I was working in shipping myself at COP21, promoting the first time that we should be part of the Paris Agreement. And it's been a very positive journey, but it's not, has not been inclusive, even though we at COP26 said it should be a just transition. So I think we need to go hand in hand. And I think the LR Decarbonization Center, in your work on green corridors, you should make it mandatory to go hand in hand with the local community, local training centers, and local companies. And in Norway, when we developed oil in the 70s, we didn't know anything about it. We had no skills, no training, no companies. It took us 10 years, but we worked in parallel with the American explorers, and we established our own industry, which we are exporting now. Now, that can be replicated in this green new industry in Africa, that we work in tandem, and that we deployed the port systems, fuel systems, and shipping systems together. At the Green Shipping Challenge meeting at the start of this COP, 14 companies, all from the global north, headed by the governments of USA, France, Norway, and Denmark. Africa was not there. We should, next time, 2 years from now, it has to be equal terms on these great, great achievements. So that was more a comment, but it would be good to have your point. Do you see African companies having an appetite and interest in joining this work?
The short answer to that is yes. And the reason I say that is we just before COP28, on the 27th of November, we held a virtual meeting with some maritime stakeholders. Many African companies dialed into that meeting. And the question was, how can we work together to transition the continent, the African maritime sector, to a zero-emission future? And they were very interested to know what we had to offer as a group, because they wanted to know what it meant for them. But one thing I must say, though, with that interest and eagerness was caution. They were very cautious not to say what was on their mind, not to express any concern that they may have. So there is something there around building trust, building confidence, that we are in it together. You won't be left on your own. It will be more of a carrot than stick, because I think generally shipping companies, they get beaten more often than not when they get it wrong. But I think we need to be able to help them feel comfortable that, yes, it's going to be a challenging journey, but there is more to gain being part of it than doing the opposite. So the short answer is yes, and that's one of the things I'm quite keen and eager to get going in my new job, because I just see the opportunities there for the continent. I do. But we need to raise awareness, we need to build trust, we need to build confidence, and most importantly, we need to collaborate, but between state and non-state actors, and as you mentioned, at the IMO, to make sure that the policies are fit for purpose for the region. Thank you. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for the conversation today. I think I have a two-part question, and I think one would probably be answered mainly by Camille and Alia, and then the next one will be answered with regards to seafaring. So with the first question I have, you talk a lot about Africa in general as a continent, but we all know that there are only the coastal African countries that have seafaring abilities. And so if we go a bit into the depth of this, which countries are you talking about? Are you talking about Egypt? Are you talking about Algeria? Are you talking about the Western African countries? With regards to the potential that you're talking about in terms of the whole greenification and potentially bunkering hubs, I can think of some in my mind just with regards to if we're talking about East-West corridor, like if you're going the East-West shipping corridor, which countries would be along those? But what are you thinking about on that sense, right? So we can get down into specifics about African countries, not just Africa as a continent. And then the second part, I wanted to actually understand a bit more with regards to seafaring. What's the contribution of African people with regards to seafaring? Because I understand, again, I know very little with regards to seafaring. I know the majority of seafarers do come from, I do understand from Asian countries, so from the Philippines, usually from India as well. Again, don't quote me, but I just wanted to know what's the contribution of African seafarers and where do you see the growth there? Because you were talking about the potential there. Thank you very much.
Okay, the first question around how do we, when we say Africa, what do we mean? I don't know if anybody in the panel wants to answer. I have something to say about that, but I'll see if anybody in the panel wants to respond.
I can try. I mean, I'm not a renewable energy expert, and neither an expert in any particular part of Africa, to be perfectly frank with you. But I think we tend to sometimes think too much about solar and wind, and let's not forget that there are other renewable energy sources, hydro, geothermal, etc. that are. I mean, I think more than 80% of the Kenyan energy mix is actually hydro, if I'm correct. So I think what's crucial is, it's been said so far, inclusiveness and be here for countries to help them explore the opportunities in all countries. And indeed, the realities in Morocco and in Egypt are extremely different from the realities in Nigeria. And there's no reason why we would try to apply a unique one-size-fits-all solution. But I think at the stage we are now, and I don't say that ships will be running on methanol in Africa. All ships will be running on methanol in Africa in 2030. This is simply not realistic. So there's really different phases to look at, and the retrofit of existing fleets, improvements in terms of the energy efficiency of the fleet and of the efficiency of ports, improving the connectivity of these countries, which will also aim reducing the cost of transport, are important in the shorter term. But let's not forget that all the renewable energy production, the large-scale renewable energy production projects take years to be in place, and so it's already time now in 2023 to start thinking about this for concrete results and deliveries to the shipping market in the 30s and 40s.
Thank you, Camille. Very good, Angela.
So just to reinforce the point, I don't think it's fair for us to list off countries that we think is going to be the kind of country of choice where those specific jobs are. I think the point that the report that came out last week was trying to say is we need to sort of look almost beyond just the least cost of energy production at a specific site. It's what's the value creation beyond that? What's the kind of health benefits? You mentioned, the reduction in sulfur content of shipping fuels. Okay, that had a health impact. What's that quantifiable benefit to that community in dollar terms? We kind of want to put a dollar amount to the kind of value capture that we can create as well. What's the additional benefit? And this kind of comes back to your point about how we bring governments into the conversation. Can we actually quantify what those tertiary and socioeconomic benefits are that we can't actually see? Can we use some of the data we had from previous experiences and repurpose that to give an estimate, to give an idea of what kind of value creation that is? By the way, that exercise for Africa, looking at sustainable first mover initiatives, hasn't yet been conducted. But the premise and the thinking behind what needs to be done is there. We need to go a step beyond and kind of reapply that to other regions, including Africa, where we can see those roles. And just on the point about inland versus coastal jobs around seafarers, seafaring doesn't necessarily have to be from a coastal country, right? Okay.
So seafaring was actually for,
okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, Dr. Oma, my apologies. But my question for you guys was, I think Camille touched on it a bit, and I think it was a question on, you're talking about the future of African countries in reality, a lot of the, excluding maybe seafaring and other elements, a lot of the opportunities within the shipping industry will be for countries that sit along a port, naturally speaking, right? And so we're going to talk about countries that do have ports and how they're going to develop their ports further to address, especially, again, moving forward in the future when we want to decarbonize shipping, they may want to play a role as bunkering hubs or things like that, right? So again, I didn't mean to call you guys out in terms of give me a list. I was just interested just to know what thoughts you may have with regards to certain countries that are port countries that have the potential for that. So
but let's also not forget the renewable energy supply side and the jobs related to that could be inland as well. When we talk about shipping, we also need to talk about the energy piece at the same time. These two come together. Oftentimes when we speak to various, financing communities, they put maritime in a box that doesn't ever touch the energy side, and those two conversations have to happen together, like now. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Omar, you want to answer the question on seafarers?
Yeah, I need to understand your question once again because you mixed it with this one. So I want to understand what you said about seafarers, please.
What's the contribution of seafarers in the African continent? So what's the percent? Are they a larger percent of the employment in seafaring, or are they a smaller percent? That's just more like I want to understand.
I would say that African has a lot of seafarers. They train quite a number of seafarers in different parts of Africa. It may not be the same level in one place. It may be different levels in different places. Like, you have the developing countries and you have those that are already established. But the beauty of it is, under the seafarer issues, Africa and different countries are putting in a enormous effort at ensuring they produce not only seafarers, but qualified seafarers. And we have quite a number of them. The only thing we can try to do now at this point is to ensure that whatever group of seafarers being trained at this point, there should be an additional training so they could embrace the new green technologies coming up. And as such, they can compete favorably with the seafarers in the other parts of the globe. So as for having enough seafarers, I think in the African continent, we have a lot of seafarers. It's just the opportunity to be there with the others that should be.
Thank you. Just very briefly, to wrap up on that question, Africa has, the last numbers that I saw, about 78,000 seafarers. That amounts, I think, 5% of the global seafaring workforce. But then again, if you compare that to Africa is a continent with about over 1 billion people, 70% of them are youth. Think about that as a potential for a future workforce. And many Africans want to go to sea, but they cannot get a job outside of their shores, and that's part of the problem. So when Omar says qualified, what I take from that is qualification that can get them jobs outside of their shores, especially as jobs are fairly limited within the countries that they come from. So thank you. Great question, though.
If I may, just one quick comment on that. I don't know if I'm connected. I had the chance to be in Côte d'Ivoire in February for a capacity building event with countries in the region, and this was organized in a fantastic facility, which is a regional maritime academy in Côte d'Ivoire that trains seafarers from, I think, 20 countries. And I really noticed how passionate students there were about actually the energy transition of shipping. They're saying that it's happening and they want to be part of it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sorry. To you, sir.
Thank you. Sam, excellent moderation.
Thank you.
Christopher Fee from Oldendorff Carriers. So we own and operate a fleet of about 700 ships globally. Firstly, I just want to make a comment and then I have a question to follow. The comment, Africa has a significant role to play in just transition. But it's not just about developing seafaring capabilities in African countries. It's what mustn't be lost in the discussion is also making sure that those seafarers are also women. So there's only 2% of global seafarers globally are women, and most of those seafarers are working on cruise ships. Our company is battling to find female seafarers, all right? Africa is a huge opportunity, there's a huge opportunity in Africa to, as you mentioned, very young workforce, many countries, high unemployment levels. There's opportunities for shipping companies like ourselves to go, do a campaign of the schools, bring the industry to the schools, demonstrate to these young ladies and young boys that there are opportunities out there for, in our industry, and they could really make a rewarding career out of it. So that's just one comment, and I think is, you know, you're not just limited to coastal African countries. I use Ethiopia as an example. It's landlocked, and it's one of the biggest contributors to seafarers in Africa, in the world, actually. My question is for Camille. Not to discredit the fantastic work of the IMO and the member states. You mentioned the global sulfur cap. Excellent. I mean, dropping the sulfur emissions by 80% overnight, that was a huge achievement. But well, I think we can all agree that sometimes the regulators get it wrong, and in recent months we've seen some regulations coming out. I think you know the ones I'm talking about, carbon intensity indicator, which is creating some very perverse incentives that has the potential to increase emissions from international shipping when we're all here to try and reduce the emissions from international shipping. So I know the review years in 2026. I don't believe that is soon enough. I think that we all need to realize and accept the fact that it's not fit for purpose, this regulation. It's inherently flawed, and something needs to be done about it now, while we should not be waiting until 2026 to fix something that we know is already broken today. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Camille.
Thank you, Christopher. Yeah. On the CII point, it may be a bit niche for some of us, for our audience. Just to say that the review is starting already now. Actually, it's starting next year. So, and as a new piece of legislation, it's that this review clause was inserted to also have a phase where we build upon the experience from the industry. So I think it's now time for the industry to come with proposals on how to improve the CII. We cannot simply, you know, do as it never happened. There is really a potential to improve the CII to make it effective. So now it's for, I think, the industry and member states to come with proposals already now in order for the review by 2026 to indeed improve the system. I wouldn't be that critical about it, but because I think it already brought some positive dynamics in shipping, but we can have a separate discussion if you want.
Very good. Thank you very much, Camille. I've been given the 2 minutes warning, so we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much indeed to our excellent panelists for sharing with us your insights. And of course, thank you very much to the audience for your time, for your questions, and for your comments. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. So a huge round of applause for our panelists, please. And everybody else. And thank you very much. So we'll now pass on to Ruth for the closing remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I know there are some outstanding questions that still need to be asked. So I do encourage afterwards, I know we don't want to encroach on the time of the next people coming in, but so do stay around afterwards just outside and we can answer some more questions. So, you know, some of the takeaways from that session, you know, incredible session, lots of potential, we just need to be harnessed is what I was hearing. That we We need more participation in African countries. There's a call to action from the IMO to engage in the IMO system, but equally, within the non-state actor system, there's a huge amount of opportunity there. We heard especially around the potential for enhancing collaboration within Africa, not just countries but companies, and that the coastal ecosystem, there's smaller ships, there's inland ecosystems as well. These all rely on the same kind of technologies, the same kind of skill sets. So the opportunity goes beyond just what we might call shipping as well, into that wider ocean and wider aqua economy as well. We heard about indigenous shipping, we heard about the interior. I had a very strong message from Omar that the additional training for seafarers is in evolving technology areas and moving to that higher level in the supply chain. Not the low level. And what I'm hearing there is that economics needs to stick in Africa. And that will be also a question, and a question I think very much in the private sector as well, is about the governance, the corporate investment that needs to go into Africa and that needs to stay in Africa as we go forward, and the benefits that will stick. What I didn't hear, I didn't hear anyone talk about autonomy, which was kind of interesting, the autonomous and the new technologies around autonomy, which will bring additional, the service and the supply of autonomy models, data into the greater maritime system, is also a large opportunity for all parts of Africa, whether you're coastal or not. There's going to be a big sector there, which can absolutely draw on the skill sets of those young people that we talked about. And the new kinds of engineering that are going to be needed as well. Another high-level opportunity for high economic benefit within Africa. I heard you talk about the fear of the unknown as well. And so we're going to need to have the ability to forge our own futures, our own pathways. That Africa needs its own ability to do that and to take control of that future itself. And that will need a level of governance and collaboration internally. So that's me wrapping up, what I'm hearing, as well as great optimism for the continent. I'm hearing about these great economic opportunities that are people-centered opportunities. We're thinking about people and not the corporations, not the governments, not the international organizations, but the people in Africa and the opportunity there for them. And I just want to wrap up by thanking, number one, everyone here today, our panel. I want to thank Magda, I want to thank Lydia, and I just want you to take this optimism out there and make the change in the areas of work that you work in as well. Thank you very much.
Just one last announcement, please. There's another session hosted by BIMCO and what's the name of the university? Yeah, so it's happening next door, right? Yeah. Okay, so it's here. All right, sorry. Okay, thank you. Thank you.